Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, guys, welcome. So I'm Chef Robert. I'm going to be teaching you guys about the components, the nutritional aspects, and the cooking methods for rices today. So a little bit of background. This is our culinary science class, so we're looking at the why behind what happens when we cook. Okay, so not just here's the method of how we're going to cook it, but why do we get to the result that we're getting based on the sort of nutritional components and the cooking methods that we apply. Okay, so today's rice. We're going to start by talking about rice. And we're going to talk about a lot of different varieties of rice. So the first thing I'm going to do here is pass this tray around for you guys. Everything is labeled, so you can just leave it all in one place. What I want you to do is feel it, smell it, look at it, touch it, taste it. It's not going to taste very good, it's raw. But we're not going to cook with this, so don't worry about putting your hands in there. And I want you to sort of start to get a mental picture of how the different rice products that we're looking at, how they differ from one another. Okay, so we'll just pass that around while we're going through the slides. Okay, so what is rice? Rice is a grain, and grains are the single seeds of grasses or cereal crops, okay? So when you are eating something like farro or rice or wheat or bulgur, those are all seeds of a grass that's grown somewhere. Those seeds are harvested and then they're dried, okay? And so when we cook rice, we use moist heat cooking methods. Does anybody remember from culinary school days, moist heat cooking methods? What do you got?
Poaching.
Poaching, great. What else?
Boiling.
Boiling, poaching, steaming, braising. What? Go ahead. Stewing. Perfect. Okay, so that's a pretty big overview of moist heat cooking methods, and all of those are different, but what do they have in common? What is it that unites moist heat cooking methods?
A liquid.
Liquid, and what kind of liquid?
Water.
Water-based liquid specifically, right? So when we are in the kitchen and we look at something like stock or carrot juice or Coca-Cola, those are all water-based liquids. And so if we were to cook with any of those products, we would be cooking with moist heat, right? When we look at liquid fats, even though they're in a liquid state, we do not consider those to be moist ingredients in the kitchen because they're not based in water. Okay, so the first thing that we need to know about rice is that it's going to require a water-based liquid in order to be cooked because it's been dehydrated from its natural state. Now, rice in its natural state contains all of the macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, and fats. You guys will probably remember some of that stuff from Chef Audrey's lesson. So we have proteins, carbohydrates, and fats in a whole rice grain, okay? And we're gonna get to, in a minute, what the components of that whole grain are. So what rice does not contain is the specific type of protein, gluten. Anybody ever heard the term glutinous rice before? Glutinous rice? Any guesses on how we get glutinous rice with no gluten?
Starch. Gelatin or something?
Yeah, you're totally on track. So the idea of glutinous rice versus the protein of gluten are two completely different things, and in fact, they actually have two different spellings, okay? So a glutinous rice is a gluten-free product. I didn't do the naming, I know that's like the worst thing ever, but just be aware of that. There's no rice variety that exists that contains protein gluten, okay? Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't contain protein at all, it just doesn't contain that specific protein. All right, now, within the rice itself, right, within every little granule of rice that you have, there are 4 components involved in that rice. You guys see this down here at the bottom? If not, actually, you know what, go ahead and just go to the next slide. Perfect, all right. So when the rice comes off of the tall blade of grass, it's going to look like this. It's going to have something on the outside called the husk. That is the only inedible part here. And that's going to be milled off right away. And then below the husk, you have a layer called the bran. Okay? This guy right here, in the middle grain of rice, is the bran. That's the shell on the outside. Sometimes I tell students to think of rice as if it's an egg, right? So you have the shell around the outside. You have the egg white, which is kind of like the food for the growing chick. And you have the germ here at the bottom, which is kind of like the yolk. The germ is what would become the new blade of grass if that were to be germinated and then planted and then grown again. So this is kind of like the egg yolk that would become the chick, or the germ would become the grass. All right. So in this case, we have a brown rice grain right here. You guys have the tray of rice going around. So you'll notice there's differences, right? So both the long grain rice and the brown rice are the exact same variety, right? But they have something different about them. One is brown and one's white. And the difference is that one has been refined to this state right here, okay? So here we have brown rice, which contains the endosperm, okay? And the endosperm is the primary source of carbohydrates in the rice. We have the bran on the outside. That is the primary source of fiber and also some nutrients as well. Okay, and then we have the germ here as well, and the germ is the primary source of protein. And I say primary source because the carbohydrates the endosperm does in fact contain a bit of protein, but the majority of the protein that you're going to find in a whole grain comes from the germ. Okay, and then we have the final variation, and this is what you see as white rice, and this is the rice grain with both the bran and the germ removed, leaving only the endosperm. Does anybody know why? Like, why would we do that? Why do we want to get rid of the stuff that has the fiber, the nutrients, the proteins? Like, why do we want to refine this down to just a simple carb?
It makes it a smoother product.
Okay, so consistency? Sure. Any other ideas, guesses?
Taste. It has a stronger taste when it has the bran on it.
So the bran has a certain flavor to it, and maybe for some people they don't want that taste. We want to eliminate that. Sure. What else, Cheyenne?
Maybe the texture will be different.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think all of those are correct. If we go way back in culinary history, the reason that this practice started is because both the bran needs to be removed in order to access the germ, and the germ goes bad. The germ goes rancid. So for long-term storage, this process was invented. And then people discovered that they liked that it was smooth, they liked that it was tasty, they liked that it was even colored, they liked that it didn't have that nutty flavor that the bran has, and that it made them feel a little sophisticated and refined. And so this really took off, okay? But the reality is we're really losing a lot of the nutrient content when we eat just the white rice. Do you guys have questions on the anatomy? Feel pretty comfortable about that? Excellent.
I
Let's
have
go
a
to the next
question.
one. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Based on the models here, can brown rice come as long, short, and medium?
Yes, absolutely. So all rice grains, regardless of the shape of the grain, have the exact same structure. So a brown, you guys have a long grain brown rice, but you could certainly have a medium grain or a short grain brown rice as well. And in fact, all of the medium and short grain rices that are on the tray started life out as a brown rice.
Right.
What else? Good? Excellent. All right, let's go to the next slide, Michaela. Okay, so in addition to the components, we also have the methods of processing. So we talked a lot about this in the last slide. So very quickly here, when we look at a whole grain, that means that we have all the components intact. So in the case of rice, what we're talking about is brown rice. In the case of rice, when we talk about refining, what we're talking about is removing that bran and that germ and leaving just the endosperm. That's our refined grain. And then the final category that we have, you have a little dish of that on the tray, is the milled grain, which in this case is rice flour, right? So sometimes I think that people get a little bit hung up on the steps in processing, and so just be aware that when we talk about refined and milled, we're talking about two different things. Okay? One last note on that, you can have both a refined and milled product, right? That would be white rice flour as opposed to brown rice flour. Sorry, it's so hazy and hard to see. So we talked a lot about this already, so we're not going to go through this much, but just a reminder, we have the fiber and a lot of the minerals and vitamins, the micronutrients, in the bran. We have the core, which is packed, the germ, which is packed with the proteins and also a lot of the micronutrients. And then we have the endosperm, which is primarily the carbohydrate macronutrient. Okay, you can go to the next one. All right, now this is going to be the most complicated concept that we're going to cover today. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this, but the idea is that when we eat rice dishes, we're going to find lots of variations in texture. So who can think of a rice dish that's like light and fluffy and airy? Pilaf. That's a really textbook perfect example of a rice dish that's nice and fluffy and airy. What about something that's sticky and clumpy? Yeah, sushi. Sushi rice is a perfect example of that. Both of those are rice, right? But they're not the same. How about a rice dish that's creamy?
Risotto?
Yeah, risotto is a perfect example of that. So we have 3 rice dishes. All 3 of those can be made with only the rice, right? I mean, we need the liquid to cook them in, but we don't necessarily say, oh, it's only risotto because it has mushrooms in it, or it's only pilaf because we season it with cardamom, right? So it's not about what's the ingredients, it's about what the cooking methods are and what the starch content of the rice that we're looking at, okay? So this is really going to be the major influencer of how the rice products that you're preparing, how they come out, okay? So I want to spend a minute on this, even though it's a little bit of a complex topic. So you guys look at the tray and you'll notice there are 3 varieties of rice that are listed by the length of grain, right? What do we have on the tray?
Long, medium, and short.
Okay, so we have long, medium, and short grain rices. And if you look at those up close, Audrey, you're the closest one to them, what looks similar and what looks different?
Obviously, the length gets longer as you go from short to medium to long.
Okay,
The short and medium have a little bit of a white dot, like a white speck to them.
Okay.
You don't see that on the long grain.
okay.
And then the short and medium look a little whiter in color than the long grain.
Okay, so one thing I want you to notice is that throughout that conversation, you grouped the short and the medium a lot, right?
Yeah.
And then the long was separate.
Yes.
If I was the person doing the naming, I would have called them like short and extra short and long. The reality is that the 2 shorter ones, the medium and the short, are way over here on the spectrum, and the long is way over here on the spectrum. So if you're making a dish and you want to substitute, like the recipe calls for a medium grain and I only have short, then you can make that substitution. But if the recipe calls for a long and I only have short or medium, it's not going to be a good substitution. So here's why. There are 2 types of carbohydrates that exist in rice grains. One of them is called amylopectin. And the way that I think of amylopectin is it's like branches on a tree. Okay, so I have my fingers as the branches, and when they interact with each other, they get tangled up. So that's this structure right here. Those branches tangle with each other and they make a network, okay? And that network causes the starches to bind to one another. What happens when the starches bind to one another? Which rice would we guess has that property? A rice that is
Sticky.
light and fluffy or sticky? Sticky. Okay, so our short and medium grain rices are going to have this type of carbohydrate. Okay, this structure of carbohydrate, which means that they are going to want to bind together and they're going to want to change the texture when that happens. So this is going to be more sticky, more creamy, right? That means that that starch is available, it's going to be released into the water and form those bonds where this one rice is joining up with this other rice just through starch in the water. Okay? It forms a gel. On the other hand, when we look at amylose, it's like a pigtail. Those pigtails just go in the pot and they just bounce off of each other. They don't get tangled up because they don't have these branches that are out there grabbing onto one another. And so as they bounce off from one another, they retain the majority of their starch within themselves, as opposed to releasing that starch into the cooking liquid in the process. Does that make sense? Great. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so we talked about this. This is our short grain rice. This is the fattest, roundest type of rice. This is the stickiest type of rice, and this is the highest in amylopectin. All those things we covered. Good there? Great. Next up. Medium rice does not fall in the halfway point between short and long. Medium grain rice is more similar to short, and it contains high amount of amylopectin with some of the amylose, right? The carbohydrate structure that does not bond. Okay, next one. All right, and then we have our long grain rice. This is a slim type of rice that cooks up fluffy. It doesn't clump. In other words, it's not sticky. It retains its own carbohydrate structure. It doesn't share it with its other rice grain friends. Okay? Low in amylopectin and high in amylose, the carbohydrate that is not sticky. You can't see that at all, but that is a website that you might want to check out on your own time. Okay, so I'm gonna demonstrate cooking some of these different grains, but I also want to talk about throughout the cooking process the other things that are going to affect your finished result. So we know that the amount of available starch, we know that the level of refinement are going to affect the rice cookery through those scientific principles we just covered, right? So we also need to understand how different rice processes affect the finished result as well. So the first one, and I'm going to need probably a little help with this because I don't have a sink, so I'm going to get a volunteer to come drain this at the end of this, okay? So the first one we're going to do is, Michaela, will you go to the next slide? Perfect. We're going to start right here on the absorption and the boiling method, and we're going to do this because these two are so incredibly different, even though we're going to use the exact same ingredients and the exact same amount of time to cook them, okay? So for the rapid boiling method or the boiling method of cooking rice, we're cooking rice basically like pasta. So the idea here is that none of the rice touches the other rice in the cooking process. So thinking critically about what we've discussed so far, and I'm going to go ahead and do it. I've got a large pot of rapidly boiling water. It's slightly seasoned. That's all there is to it, okay? And then again, I'm going to get somebody to come volunteer to drain that. I've got towels for you. Okay, so the rice isn't touching any of the other rice. What might be the advantage of this cooking method now that we know a little bit about starch and how it behaves in the cooking process? Any ideas?
Won't get stuck together.
Okay, so it's got a lot of room to move around, so it's not going to get stuck together. Let's look, I think we can get more answers here if we look at the absorption process at the same time. So let's look at this real quick and we'll come right back to that question. So on the next burner, you're going to notice something different. I have a measured quantity, right? So here I dumped the rice into a large pot of water and I didn't measure anything. Here I have measured quantity. That's because I'm cooking using a ratio, all right? So that means I'm going to add my, in this case water, but stock would be fine, or whatever water-based liquid you wanted to cook in. I'm going to add this in, okay? I'm going to bring it to a boil, and then I'm going to cover it, and I'm going to reduce the heat to a simmer, and I'm just going to let it simmer. And at the end of the cooking process, named absorption, there will be no water left. All the water will be absorbed into the rice. Is that going to happen here? No. So if all the water absorbs into the rice here, where does the starch go? It stays in the rice, right? It goes right back into the rice in the cooking process. Where does the starch go here? It goes down the drain. So the end result, even if I'm cooking the same thing, using the exact same ingredients, the exact same quantities, and the same cooking time, the end result is going to be different because this will be rinsed of all its starch, and this product will have absorbed all its starch in the process. Make sense? Okay, so the demonstration here is to show you that these are going to be polar opposites, and at the very end you guys are going to be able to taste them, and you have an analysis sheet so that you can compare that, and you can say, did the one that got cooked without any contact between the rice grains, did those rice grains become more tender? Did they become less sticky? Did they become more sticky? Did they become more creamy? All of those things you'll be able to see in the finished result. Now, I only have 2 burners, so do you guys mind if we just finish this one on the back and we'll start the next? Great, I'll bring that around, and I'll let you guys know when to drain that. Thanks, guys. Okay, so you've got a sink right there. I'll just call it out when you guys are ready to go. All right. So, do you guys have questions on the first 2 cooking methods we looked at? Do you understand? Yeah, go ahead.
Is one more nutritious than the other due to the release of the starch?
So, the boiling method is certainly going to contain less calories per serving, right? Because we're going to lose starch. But in terms of, so we're going to lose some carbohydrates. We're not going to lose much else, especially because in this case we're using white rice for both, and so we're really talking about nothing but almost pure carbs. So it's going to be pretty similar. Yeah.
Would rinsing the rice prior to adding it to the water skew the absorption method?
Absolutely. So one of the keys, and you'll notice I underline this here, is that when we cook using the absorption method, we always use a set ratio, right? That's what's determining that in this case, that we always want to use a precise amount of liquid. Why would that be? What would be the advantage of making sure that we have a precise ratio when we use absorption?
It'll overcook because it'll soak up too much liquid.
So if we have if the ratio is too heavy on water, it will overcook. And what's the result? It will be what? Mushy, right? Okay, and then what if we don't have enough liquid?
Crunchy.
Crunchy, it might scorch on the bottom of the pan. It might never cook all the way through. Lots of issues like that, right? Also might cook unevenly. So when we're cooking using the absorption method, we need a specific ratio. Now that ratio will change the more starch you remove prior to the cooking process. So will it affect it? Yes. Will it mean you can't apply that method? No, not at all. It just means that you have to adjust your ratio accordingly. Other questions on that? We got one. All right, so back to our absorption. I'm going to cover this. If I'm absorbing water, why would it be important to cover?
Because the water is steaming and you're losing the water.
Exactly. We don't want to evaporate off any water. So we're going to put a lid on top. And I'm going to stick this on the burner over here. Now, you guys can't see that over there, but I'm using very, very low heat. Why would that be important?
So it doesn't burn.
Yeah, we don't want to scorch the bottom. Remember that carbohydrates like to convert to sugars in that cooking process, that Maillard reaction, and we don't want browning on the bottom of our pot. All right. Michaela, will you go to the next slide? Okay, great. Actually, will you go ahead and go 2 slides forward? Perfect. Can you guys see that at all? Those pictures represent the 2 trays that I have on my station. Okay. And these are for the next 2 of the 4 methods that we're going to look at. This is the risotto method and the pilaf method. So has everybody in here had risotto at some point in their life? What do you want in risotto? What is the right risotto? What should it taste like?
Al dente.
Okay, we want an al
Bite.
dente. So it should have a little bite. What else?
Creamy.
Creamy. What else?
Like when you put it on the plate, you should be able to tap the bottom and it should like spread a little bit.
So it should bulge,
Yeah.
right, around the edges. Okay. Now, what would cause it to be both creamy and bulge around the edges? Starch. Yeah. Do you guys remember which one? Amylopectin, exactly. So if we have a rice with a lot of amylopectin, it's going to be a suitable rice for the cooking method. So what do I want to use here? Short, medium, long? Short or medium. Short or medium are going to be our appropriate rices for the pilaf method. Okay. I'm sorry, for the risotto method. So the next one we're going to look at here on this burner is the pilaf method. I want you to notice some differences here. In the pilaf, what kind of container is my stock in? It's measured, right? So I'm using what? A ratio. All right. So the pilaf method is the absorption method with some dry heat applied at the beginning. We'll get to that in a second. And how about risotto? Where's the stock?
On the burner.
It's right there. Exactly. It's hot and it's unmeasured. I don't use a specific ratio. I don't use a specific quantity of rice to stock. Or water, for that matter. Okay, so we're going to start with risotto. My pan is hot. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of aromatics. Ignore the ingredients in this picture. I'm trying to show you the differences in the setup. Ingredients don't matter. It's all about method, right? So we're concerned about the method, not the ingredients. And if somebody back there can strain rice, that would be great. Okay, so I put some aromatics in. Today, I'm just using a brunoise onion, and I'm going to use a brunoise onion for both. Because I want the results to speak for themselves, I don't want you muddying the results with other ingredients in there. So we're going to use the exact same thing. So for the pilaf method, we're going to start the same way. So I'm going to add my fat to the pan. I'm going to hope that gets hot, and I'm going to melt that fat down. This says it's on full blast, but I don't know. All right, how about the utensils? What's the difference here? I have a wooden spoon and I have a metal fork. Any reason why you think I might be using different utensils?
The fork will fluff the peel off, not like kind of squish it.
Yeah, exactly. And how about why did I take a wooden spoon for my risotto? Why not a metal spoon? What is which one has a softer edge? A wooden spoon. So the risotto process is going to tell me to stir the entire time because starch extraction likes agitation, meaning that the more I move it, the more of that starch that likes to bind together is going to be released from the rice. And so if I'm moving it constantly with a metal spoon, I'm going to start cutting that rice up, and I'm going to end up with broken rice in the pot. So my goal here is to use only either like a rubber spatula would be fine, or a wooden spoon, just to make sure that I don't break up the rice throughout the continuous stirring process. Okay, that's getting hot-ish. We're going to add that guy in. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do, nothing to do with the method, but you guys know this being in the kitchen, I'm going to season everything a little bit. And I'm also going to add my herbs. In this case, I just have a teaspoon or so of fresh thyme, and again, exactly the same in both pots. I want you to see the difference in the rices, not the difference in the flavors of the ingredients, right? I don't know how to make that any hotter, but it is what it is. Okay, so the beginning part of both of these methods is exactly the same, which is that I'm going to apply dry heat to the rice before I actually cook it. So risotto, what's the rice? Short, medium, or long? Short or medium. That's going in the pot. And pilaf, it's in a measuring cup, right? Because I have a set ratio and this is important. All right? So my pilaf is going in as well. And what type of rice for pilaf? If I want light and fluffy?
Long.
Long grain, high in amylose, low in amylopectin. All right. Now, any guesses why it would be important to do the toasting at the beginning or the applying the dry heat to the rice itself? Go ahead, Cheyenne.
I'm going to bring out some of the flavor in the rice.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that browning, like we're going to get some pale browning on this, and we know that that develops flavor. What else? Okay, so in the risotto method, we're not necessarily so worried about this, but in the pilaf method, coating the grains of rice will actually help aid in that light fluffiness, because even though these have a type of starch that doesn't bond as well, it's still going to stick together a little bit, right? Because it's still a starchy product, no matter how we slice it. So by coating it in a little bit of fat through the toasting process, what we're going to do is protect those grains of rice so that they don't stick together in the cooking process. So, nice and toasted. We're going to add stock here in a pre-measured quantity. I'm going to stir it a little bit, but what did we just talk about with what stirring does to starches in the cooking process? Agitates them, and that causes them to extract from the product, okay? So what we're going to do, I'm going to use that burner is not very good, so I'm going to put that there. That's going to be on low heat. We're going to bring that to a boil, turn it down to a simmer, and then we're going to wait for all of the water to absorb because this one uses a set ratio, right? Which is very important. So here in my, the pan that's causing the issue. Can somebody grab me another pan? Thank you. All right, so for the risotto, we're going to toast it. We're going to use the toasting to develop flavor, but we're not particularly concerned about whether or not that rice is going to stick together. Because no matter what we do, we're going to release a lot of the amylopectin or of the starches in the cooking process. Awesome, thank you. Hopefully this one works. Okay. So for my risotto, I have an unmeasured quantity. Just make this transfer. Okay, great. So, for my risotto here, I have an unmeasured quantity of stock, and you'll notice something about my stock. There's steam coming off of it, right? Any guesses why it might be important here to preheat the stock, whereas I didn't do it on my pilaf? Sarah?
Because if you add cold stock, it'll just cool cool everything down and stop the cooking process.
Exactly, right? So the last thing I want to do in a process where I'm going to be adding stock slowly is stop the cooking process, okay? So remember, we talked about at the beginning of the process, the two, both pilaf and risotto are exactly the same when we start cooking, right? At the beginning of the process. So when they start to defer is when we start to add liquid, okay? So no matter what we're doing, we're applying dry heat first, followed by moist heat. Anybody remember what that makes this? Combination method. So these are combination cooking methods. Now, here we measured a specific ratio. We covered it with a lid in order to trap all the steam because we want the exact amount of water that started to be the amount of water at the end. Here we don't have any of that. I didn't measure anything ahead of time. I just have hot stock and enough of it. And that's all I'm concerned about. Do I know what the ratio is? Even if I wanted to guess, why might I not be able to determine exactly what the ratio is for the risotto method?
Because you don't know how much steam is coming off of it.
Yeah, exactly, because maybe it's a really humid day and it's evaporating more slowly. Or maybe I'm using a really, really wide pot. Why would that make a difference?
Surface area.
Surface area, so much more steam evaporation if I have a lot of surface area. Maybe I'm cooking risotto in a bain-marie. I don't know why I would be doing that, but I might be doing that. So what's going to happen there? I'm going to lose a lot less liquid in the cooking process. So just don't get bogged down with measurements when you're making your risotto. It's more about the process and introducing that liquid as you go. All right, so what I'm going to do here, I'm not moving this at all. I'm not doing anything. I'm just leaving it alone, right? What I'm doing here is agitating this as much as possible to extract all those starches and get them kind of soaking into the rice in the cooking process. All right, and in doing that, I'm drawing some starch out. And I want to show you guys, 2 more seconds, you're going to be able to see actual starch in this pot with your naked eyes. You don't need like a microscope to see this amylopectin in action, okay? And it's actually a really good indicator, a really good visual indicator for you to know when to make your next stock addition in the risotto cooking process, okay? So I'm going to walk around with this. And what you guys are going to notice here, you guys just kind of stick your face in here, is there streaks on the bottom of the pan. Okay? Those streaks are the starches that are being extracted from the rice in the cooking process. You guys see if I move the rice around, you're going to see streaks in there, right, across the bottom. If I didn't have accessible starch in the pot, the rice wouldn't leave streaks behind when I moved it. It's a really good visual indicator for you to know when it's time to add the next round of liquid, because that means that the rice itself has absorbed all the liquid that's in the pot, and so all we've got now is that starchy rice starch slurry that's moving around in the pot. And that's when I know I'm ready for my next round. How many additions of water is it going to take?
We don't know.
Yeah, who said that? Great answer. As many as it takes. I don't know. Am I making it in a wide pot or a bain-marie? It's hard to know. So, just be aware that, you know, one thing that I notice with cooks a lot is they will look at a cooking time or look at a measurement and they'll say, well, the box said 25 minutes, so it's ready. Well, the rice is still crunchy, but the box said 25 minutes. It's not about that, it's about the process. So learning and understanding the process is really the key to understanding how to cook it, not following the specific ratio or the specific recipe or the specific amount of time. All right, so again, I'm just going to keep moving this as much as possible and extracting as much as starch as possible. And meanwhile, we're just going to take a look here. All right, well that's on setting number 1 and it's boiling, so we're going to hope for the best because that's as low as it goes. All right, but again, we're just going to leave this alone as much as possible. So we know that this has a high amount of amylase and low amylopectin, so it's not going to be sticky anyway. But what if I use this rice? What if I use this long grain rice with this method? With the pilaf method? I'm sorry, with the risotto method.
It kind of just crumbled.
Yeah, I think, so what's going to end up happening is that no matter what, remember we're talking about products that are both, these are both white rices, meaning, that they're almost entirely made up of carbohydrates. So that means that they're very, very high in starch no matter what. So when you look at the chart that compares amylase and amylopectin, be aware that yes, one of them is creamier than the other, one of them is stickier than the other, one of them is fluffier than the other, but at the end of the day, they're all starch. Okay, so could I apply a long grain rice to the risotto method? Yeah. I'm probably going to get something that's more like soup than like classic risotto, but it doesn't mean, excuse me, it doesn't mean that I can't apply the method. Okay? All right, so we're going to keep stirring this. And we're going to check the other rice as well. And then here in a second, we're going to taste them. So does everybody have a paper with the cooking methods on it? All right, so what you're going to find on one side is the 4 cooking methods, and that's just for you so that you can kind of differentiate. So what are some characteristics that chart is asking you for, characteristics of different cooking methods? So somebody give me the characteristics of rice cooked using the absorption method. What are some characteristics of that?
Ratio.
Okay, so it uses a set ratio. Okay, so what else? What else is important about the absorption method?
Retains all of the starch.
Retains all of its starch, right? So if we know that it's going to retain all of its starch, and we know that we need a set ratio, how might we pick a type of rice that we're using in the kitchen? So if I said you have to make an absorption cooked rice, and you know that you're not going to be stirring, you're going to be cooking it in an enclosed container, you know that you're going to use a set ratio, and you know what the desired result is for absorption cooked rice, what might you pick?
Long grain rice.
Okay, so some type of long grain rice, and why? Anybody else want to help
Because
Liliana?
it'll produce like a fluffier texture because it has less of the amylopectin
Yeah.
in it.
Exactly. It's going to produce a fluffier texture. It's going to give you a lighter end result that's more appropriate to the particular cooking method that you're going for, right? So when we look at all of these things, what we're trying to do is match cooking methods with types of grain, all right? Now, all of this applies to rice, and it's a ton of information, right? But the good news is a lot of this applies to other grains. Okay, so there are grains out there in the world that contain amylose, and there are grains out there in the world that contain amylopectin. Amylose is going to be the more common one. Okay, so a good thing to remember is just the ones that have amylopectin, which are short and medium grain rices, barley, some varieties of wheat, and that's really about it. Most of the other grains that you eat are going to be higher in amylose as opposed to amylopectin. So it's good to know because it means that you can then apply the same cooking methods that we're looking at today to other grains. You could take barley, which is a grain with a high amount of amylopectin, and make risotto. So a lot of times I think people hear pilaf or they hear risotto and they immediately think, oh, it's got to contain rice. And the reality is it only needs to contain grain. That's it, just a grain. So if you know about the structure of the grain, and if you know what the different cooking methods do to those grains, that's going to help you make the determination of what grain to use for what cooking methods you're using. Okay? Does that make sense? Everybody pretty clear on all that? Okay, so what we're going to do, I'm going to just keep stirring this rice, and hopefully we have our other rices ready to go. And we have about 4 or 5 minutes, so I want you guys to come up and take a look at what's going on in the pots. This guy's not quite ready, but you're going to immediately be able to see the differences. And I want you to look at it, and on the back you're going to have a sensory analysis chart. And what it's going to talk about is what is the textural difference? What is the visual difference? What's the color difference? How does it taste? You might want to wait on that one. A little crunchy still, but we're getting there. And then you can sort of see for yourself how, using nothing but the exact same ingredients and nothing but rices, we're able to get entirely different results just based on knowing something about the starch and knowing about how those starches interact with cooking processes. Okay? All right, so if you want to grab your analysis chart and come on up, and we'll lay some of these guys out. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Is that all absorbed? Still going? Ah, great. Okay, perfect. stock in here. Perfect, thank you. You guys don't have to be shy, come on over. We can do this all together. All right, so absorption right here. Brown rice. Boiling method right here. That probably needed more time. I didn't realize that was brown rice. That's okay. Peel off here. And we're going to wait a little bit on the risotto, although I'm going to put a little bit in the bowl for you to see. It's not cooked all the way through, but I want you to take a look at it because you are going to be able to see a difference in the texture. You are going to be able to see that starch creating the creaminess in the liquid in the pot. Okay? So peel off here. Okay, we're going to go a little longer on that. Steamy. Okay, so this actually is an opportunity to also look at some visuals that can indicate whether or not your rice is ready in the cooking process as well. So, as you guys go through and fill out the charts, take a look in the pot. One thing that you'll notice when you're cooking risotto is that sometimes it will have a little bit of a pearl-colored, solid white center, okay? And that's actually your visual indicator to say this rice isn't ready yet. So you know risotto, short and medium grain rices are perfectly cooked when the center turns translucent, okay? And so, if we look carefully at these grains as they're cooking, do you guys see a little kind of darker or whiter center in the middle of the rice?
Yeah.
So that says to me, my rice has got to keep cooking. It's not there yet, okay? So that's a good visual indicator for you as you go. All right, so you guys can look. You don't necessarily have to taste all the rices, but just to give you an idea of how you see different results based on different cooking methods being applied, okay? Again, it's for your own benefit. You don't have to necessarily fill out every category. You don't necessarily have to taste everything. I just want you to sort of be aware that everything's very different. Okay? All right. Do you guys have any questions to wrap up while we're tasting and going through the different rices? Again, sorry that it's not cooked all the way, but we're getting there. Maybe we'll get there in 2 minutes. Anyone questions at all? Okay. Is everybody pretty clear on the difference between amylose and amylopectin?
Yeah.
Is everyone pretty clear on why you would select different rices for different cooking methods? Yeah? And is everybody clear on how the cooking methods also affect the end result, not just the rice that you choose? So it's about lining up those combinations, right?
Right.
Right? Awesome. Okay, thanks guys.